Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'm going to be giving you guys an update on my willow here. This is the willow I'm going to be making into a bonsai eventually. The idea is I've got 4 plants and I'm going to graft them into an individual stem. So it's going to be quite an unusual looking bonsai, and this is finally in its final form. So in the previous video I had just laid these down as cuttings. They took root and they started to grow. As you can see, they've grown a huge amount since. This one on the left was one that was growing too big, so I cut that back. And as you can see, it's now much smaller than the rest. Now they're definitely ready for grafting together. I did want to graft them together when they were a lot shorter than this, but the problem I was finding is the stems at the top here, where the freshest growth is incredibly thin and very delicate, and if I was to graft this together, it's such a thin stem, it's very difficult for me to get a proper graft with such a thin delicate stem. So that's why I've let them grow a bit longer than I wasn't originally intending, just because I didn't realise how thin the stems would be. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to graft together probably 2 stems in this part of the video. Later part of the video I'll graft together 4 stems in total. And the idea is all going to graft together at a similar point, and I'm just going to use an approach graft, which is quite an easy graft to do, the one that I'll probably have the most success with. So since the last video, all that's really changed is I've weeded the pot because a lot of seedlings came up. I need to actually top up a bit of soil from here because a large weed came out with some soil. And as you can see, the moss has really started to grow. There's quite a lot of moss coming through now, and that's just going to cover the whole thing and give like a nice kind of grassy appearance. So I'm quite happy with that. Although the liverwort that's coming through, I will be removing that because that will just smother everything, and I much prefer the appearance of moss as a green covering than the appearance of liverwort. So when it comes to grafting these, I'm going to do it in opposites, I think. I think it will look more interesting. So I'm going to go with these 2 here. They're going to graft together. Ideally quite low down. I'll see how it goes. With an approach graft, you really want to not have them crossing. You want to have them more just parallel to each other. So I'll see how it goes. I'm just going to set this up now and I'll try and give this a graft. I've got a very sharp knife. With approach grafts, you don't actually take anything off of one plant and put it on the other. You just get 2 plants and you put them next to each other, graft them together. It's the lowest risk of all grafts because they're still attached to the original root system, so if the graft doesn't take, the stem's not going to die, it's just going to be weakened. So what I'm going to be doing is first of all I'll take off all these lower leaves so I can see what I'm doing. So I've now got a much clearer view. The idea for this will be to graft it around about this kind of height here. So what I'm going to do is each side of the stem where it's going to touch, I'm just going to very carefully shave a little bit off of the stem. I want to shave off around about half the stem or just under half, and then I'm going to tie them together. So in shaving them down, I've now exposed the cambium layers, and this is where the plant actually grows from. It's got meristematic tissue, which then differentiate into any other kind of tissue. So once they're connected together, they should then grow together. So now that I've made the cut, I'm just going to loosely tie these together with a piece of twine. You can also use grafting tape if you've got grafting tape, but these are pretty delicate stems. I just want to be as careful as possible. Now the good thing with this, if this fails, if I accidentally stamp the stem, what I can always do in the future is I can just cut it off and let it regrow from further down. So I'm not too worried if at this stage I make a mistake. I'll just cut the stems back and try again at a later date. So I'll just tie the top there loosely, then go down to the bottom of the graft. So you see there, I accidentally just snapped it. The reason being this was actually shaved down too thin. But this doesn't mean the graft can't still go ahead. So I'll just loosen this tie. It's still possible to do the approach graft. I'll just get these repositioned, hopefully with it being too thin. See, what I've done is I've gone under half of the stem there. So what I might do is now what they call a tongue and groove or a notch graft. I'll put the name up actually because I'm not sure, I can't remember off the top of my head. You just make a little notch in this bit and leave a bit of a flap. You shave down this one on both sides. And then you just fit it into the notch down there. And I'll just try and get that tied up. As I said before, I should have done this when these were slightly younger, these stems, because they're not actually the most flexible right now. They've already started to lignify, so I should have really done this as they were more supple and easier to bend, which is another reason that other one snapped. combination of cutting it too thin and doing this at a too later stage in its development. So I'll try and get it hooked underneath that point there. It could be quite difficult looking at this. I might have to damage the stems to bend them. I'll try and get them nooked into each other. So I'm just going to put a temporary hold there, try and get the bottoms held together. So that's them tied together. Certainly not one of my finest grafting jobs, but hopefully it will do. As I say, at least with this willow, it's fast growing. If this first attempt doesn't work, I'll just cut these shoots off and I'll try again later. So I'm just going to make sure I've got a couple of ties at the top there, and then I'm just going to wrap it up with lots of twine. Make sure it's secured. And the idea with this is we want it quite tight, because as the plant grows it will thicken and the pressure will push itself really tight into itself, and as it tries to heal the cut, it will heal against the other stem and they will actually eventually knit together as one individual plant. So we want this to be nice and tight. Also, it stops any kind of movement, because if there's any movement the graft won't take. But I will be keeping this inside though, just to make sure there's no wind, because that's definitely a risk. If there's any wind or movement, it would take a lot longer for the graft to take, or it might not even take at all. So I'll wrap that around quite tight and then tie it off. So that's that one now grafted. What I'll need to do with this one is I'll just need to make sure that any shoots that come up from this lower stem on the left here, because this doesn't have any top growth, is taken off. This stem on the right, because this top growth, will keep growing quite strong, and hopefully the energy from the roots of this one will come into the main stem, and eventually this will be the main stem at the top here. So what I could actually do in this video is try and actually graft this one in as well. Now this is tight and secured, I could give it a try. I'll see, I might even be able to get this one grafted in at a lower point, but I think what I'll do with this one is I'll wait until it's a bit longer and I can graft it in at a more similar position, because I want them to all to really graft in at the same place. So I'll try the same with this one over here. It should be easier, it's higher up, so as you can see, when it's higher up there's less of a bit of tension on it. So I'll just measure where I need to do the cut. What I will probably do is a tongue and groove cut, because I think that's the mistake I've made with this other approach graft. I just did a very simple approach graft, but I think a tongue and groove would work better, because they're going to link together and lock together better. It's a slightly more complicated graft, but it does actually work a lot better if you can do it successfully. So I'll give it a try. If I'm not successful, as I say, I'll just have to retry another time. So I just want to visualize where about I want the graft. See, I can't have it down here because there's a bit of a gap there. It has to be slightly higher up on this section of the stem here. So I'm just going to notch in like that, measure where this is, and then I'm going to do an opposite notch like up there, like that, just here. And then I just bring the two notches together, and then if it's done successfully they should take like that. So I think this one just needs to be a little bit deeper. I have to be careful. If I go too deep it will actually just break off the stem. So you just want to match them in like that, and we'll just need to shave a bit off this. This one actually is already quite thin. So we'll see how that one does. I'm not sure if I've notched that enough, so that one might not take. We'll just have to see. But I'm a bit more confident with the lower one. So that's it for now. I'll see you guys in a few weeks' time, and we'll see how successful these grafts have been. So it's now 1 month later, and as you can see, the growth has been really quite phenomenal. Got a huge amount of growth up here. We definitely need to do some pruning soon, but all that extra growth has been fantastic for getting these stems to thicken up and for the graft to take. In fact, I've been quite surprised at how fast it's been, and the string is really starting to cut in now, so I definitely need to loosen it to stop it constricting it too much. So as you can see, this top graft is really starting to cut in now, so what I need to do is try and get all this twine off before it completely restricts the sap flow. But it does look like it's grafted nicely, so what I'm going to do now is going to try and cut off some of this twine, it will be quite difficult. I'll have to be careful not to actually damage the plant itself. So that's it now taken out, and there's definitely quite a lot of damage there with how tight that's been bound around it, but it is a good graft, it is holding well. So I'm now going to go down to this lower one. This one hasn't dug in quite as much, so it should be a bit easier for me to remove the twine on this one. So that's that one now unwrapped. Now it has taken, but it hasn't taken as well as the ones at the top have. And in fact, if you look lower down, you can see we have some shoots coming up from lower down on this section of stem, which shows that it hasn't got a very good connection, as the hormones aren't travelling through the stem enough to suppress the growth. So what I'll do is I will actually remove these lower shoots to make sure that it focuses the growth on the top half. It should continue to provide energy and grow into this eventually. So for this upper shoot, what I'm going to do is cut off the one on the left, because this one has got quite a direct connection to this shoot here, whereas this one is sharing more of a connection with the bottom two. So I'm going to get the secateurs now and cut that one off the top here. And now this is the main stem with the 3 grafted into it. So you can see there we got the three stems. So what I need to do now is graft this other stem into this, around about this section here, so we can get 3 stems grafted into one. Now the appearance is really not how I would have liked it. It does look a bit odd, but we'll work with it and we'll see what I can do with this in the future. I might be able to get some wires and do a little bit of training on it once the grafts are properly taken. I'm just going to go ahead now, strip the lower leaves off, and I'm just going to repeat the process again that I did at the beginning of this video, and I'm going to get this stem now grafted up as well. So that's those 2 stems now grafted together. I did snap the actual wooden part of the stem, which is why it goes at more of a 90-degree angle. I didn't mean to do that, but with willow it's quite flexible, and even if you snap the stem, as long as it's not broken completely, the sap and the sugars can still flow through it, and it should still be able to grow. So because I have damaged it, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be putting this back in my conservatory, make sure it's in a sheltered area so there's not getting too much wind. This has been outside the last few weeks and it's been growing really well. There was a little bit of caterpillar damage, but apart from that, it hasn't been too many side effects of growing outside. I think the wind has helped actually with thickening up the stems. It's high light levels and the wind just helps to thicken the stems by stressing them. The other thing that has happened though is lower down, the birds in my garden are nesting, and they've taken out a lot of the moss, and along with some of the moss they've actually removed some of the soil as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to top this up with a little bit more soil, and I'll see you guys at the end of the video, probably another month's time. We'll see how the grafts have taken, and then I'll need to start thinking more about the appearance of this willow graft. At the moment it does look very odd, and it might not be the nicest willow bonsai ever, especially as it's quite high up. But there's a few things I can do with this. What I could do is in winter, once it's fully grafted, is I can actually cut the bottom of these off and have them reroot again in soil, so I can actually lower the whole thing by rerooting it. So that's one option anyway. But that's all for this part of the video, and I'll see you guys in a few weeks time and we'll see how the grafts have gone. So it's now about 2.5 weeks later, and I think the graft looks like it might have taken quite well. As you can see, there's been a huge amount of growth from the top half of the willow, and it's probably getting over 2.5 foot tall now, so it really has grown a lot. I'll need to do some pruning on that at a later date, but I've just been allowing this to grow quite quickly so that I can have the faster thickening, and also so it heals faster with the grafts. So looking closely at the graft here, it looks like it has taken, and the other grafts are still looking good as well. So what I'm going to do is now carefully unwrap this and we'll see what the graft looks like. So that's now unwrapped. I'll just turn it around so you can see the graft better. It does look like it has been quite a good graft. So we can see there it does appear to have grafted quite well. We've got quite a nice join, and I'm quite happy that these are now secured. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut off some of the growth to get the plant a bit more compact, and I'm also going to choose which is going to be the main plant. So when it comes to these approach grafts, what I try to make sure is that none of the stems have an original connection to themselves. So this one on the left, for example, comes up, and this is the original stem here. I like to cut off the original stem, the reason being there should be a much better connection with that section, and if I was to leave it, it might mainly take most of its energy from its original connection, and it won't really bother much with the new grafted section, and that grafted section will become weaker and weaker. So what I want to do is take out this so that every single stage of this graft coming up, it actually goes through a new section of plant, which has done for the last lot of grafts. So I'm just going to cut this left one off here. Now this should keep growing quite well. This main stem will probably have a lot of vigor now. It's got 4 root systems now providing it energy. As I said before, it does look kind of odd. I'm going to let it grow, see what happens. What I tend to find with these is that these will thicken up a lot, and you can in fact see there's a huge amount of thickening here. This is where I had the twine cutting in before, and you can see all the cutting areas have now thickened up. So what I'm going to do is allow this all to thicken up. This will probably look a little bit less strange, and eventually what might happen is this whole area here might become thicker, and you look like it's more kind of one plant at this point. What I might have to do is add in some extra graft sections. What you can do is a repair graft. I might have to do that, and what you do is you actually kind of bridge across like this, and that might kind of heal it up a bit more and make it look a little bit odd, but that's something for another video anyway. So that's all for this update now. I'll just show you how it looks. We can see I've cut the top off so it's a bit less leggy, and that's how the plant currently looks. I'll see you guys in a few months' time towards the end of summer when we're thinking about what to do with this plant. I'm going to let this grow a bit more. I'll let it branch up with this taller one. Allowing it to grow will help all the stems to thicken better and allow the grafts to take even further. And then what I'll be doing is I'll be cutting this off, and then I'll be retraining it and thinking about what the final shape will be. But that's all for this video. I'm glad that all my grafts have taken well, and I'll be interested to see how this does over time. And I'll probably keep doing unusual grafts with this as time goes on. As I say, I want to try and get the junction between all the grafts a little bit nicer, so maybe I might do some repair grafts or something like that in the future.